Chapter 5.4, Establishing and Replenishing a Petty Cash Fund. Before we get going, it's important to understand what a petty cash fund is. Petty cash is used for small, impromptu expenses, probably the best way to explain it. So let's just say I run a little concession stand and it's 6 o'clock at night and the game starts at 7 and I just happen to run out of straws. Well, the only way I'm going to get straws is I'm going to have to take some money out of petty cash, run to the nearest grocery store and buy a bunch of straws. I'm going to use petty cash for that, and that's the purpose of petty cash. For normal expenses, you're not going to use petty cash, but for the beginning, that's what you're going to be. That's why you're using petty cash for these little miscellaneous expenses. Most businesses keep petty cash, I would say under 500. It depends on the type of business that you deal with, but the lower amount of petty cash, the better. But it all depends on what you're doing. So, one of the things too is we want to talk about establishing and replenishing a petty cash fund. Well, let's take a look at that first transaction. Paid cash to establish a petty cash fund. Now, what we're doing here is basically we are starting a petty cash fund. So if you think about a petty cash box, if you're looking at a box right now there is no money in that petty cash box. You need to take cash from your regular account, write a check, and bring it into your petty cash account. So what we're going to do is we are going to then write the date, and we're going to write a check. So let's journalize it. Well, how do we write a petty? How do we write it? We're going to write a check to petty cash. What account type are we going to use? Petty cash. Now, it's important to note in this transaction, you see the wording, establish a petty cash fund. That should be an indicator to you that that's the only time you are going to use the account title petty cash, is when you first start it and you establish it. Otherwise, you are never going to use petty cash on any other when you're replenishing a petty cash fund. So when you establish, you're only using petty cash. Let's see here. Our document number is check 527. So basically, the banker wrote a check and gave it to the petty cash manager, and they took it and they cashed it, and now they have $500 in that box, that petty cash box per se, in which they can pay for miscellaneous expenses. Well, petty cash is an asset, so therefore it has a normal balance of a debit, and therefore it has a debit balance. Now, what do we have less of? Well, we actually have less of cash, so we're going to credit cash on this transaction. Because remember, the banker wrote a check, so we're basically moving cash from one cash account to a different cash account. And that's how you establish it. Keep in point, unless it says establish petty cash, you're not going to use petty cash. If it says established petty cash, then that's when you will only use the account title petty cash. So let's take a look here. So the month went on. So that was November 5th we opened it. Well, November 30th, well, we had a pretty busy month. We bought supplies with our petty cash. We had some miscellaneous expenses. We had some repairs. We had postage and all that different types of stuff. So now what we need to do is we need to, at the end of the month, it's kind of like a gas tank in a car. You drive your car for hopefully a month, but probably more like a week. It gets empty. What do you have to do? You have to replenish your car by putting more gas into it. Well, we basically need to do the same thing with our petty cash fund. Now, in order for us to replenish our petty cash fund, what we need to do is we need to list the expenses. Or, in the terms of a car, we need to basically, share our routes and our miles that we had. So let's take a look here. So we want to put the date, November 30th. First thing you're going to do is when you're replenishing a petty cash is you want to list all the expenses. Remember, we want that objective evidence, because if you go back looking for more money to replenish the petty cash fund, that accountant and that banker is going to go, well, what did you use the money for? Well, this is what you need to show you used it for. So we used it for supplies, and this was coming from C55, and we bought $38 worth of supplies. We had a miscellaneous expense, which was $67, and that can be anything. Remember, we're using the miscellaneous expense title because this is an expense that doesn't happen very often. We're going to have repairs, and for $20, and we also had a postage expense for $15. Now, if you add them up, we are going to ask for one check. So we're going to add them all up together, and we are going to credit our cash for $140. Now, the reason why we are not writing remember, we're writing a check back to our petty cash manager. The reason why we don't write 4 different checks is because we only need 1 check to replenish the petty cash fund. So that's why on the right hand side in the cash credit column you don't see a 38, a 67, a 20, and a 15. Rather you just see 140. That's because we're writing 1 check to replenish it. So then now our petty cash is back to 500 and they can start the next month and use it as needed for petty cash expenses.